We've got Walter Isaacson, who is the CEO of the Aspen Institute, Mayor Landrieu, obviously, who needs no introduction, particularly for those of you who are from the great city of New Orleans, Michael Smith, who used to lead the Social Innovation Fund and now is the lead person in the White House with My Brother's Keeper, and Scott Cowen, who you heard from yesterday with the Cowen Institute and the former president of Tulane Institute. And the former president of Tulane. But we're about to announce our Social Innovation Fund winners. I want to say before we make this announcement that all of the 22 who applied are absolutely spectacular. And I think Lily and Adria and Mamadou will talk about that. It was a very, very tough decision and a very, very close competition. But now, if I had a drum, I would do a drum roll. But now for the winners.
Thank you, Melody. So it's sort of the Academy Awards of the Opportunity Youth. We're going to open the envelope. We're officially launching this today and announcing it, and we decided, first of all, that we needed a name for this thing. It can't be the Jobs for the Future, Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, Social Innovation Fund. So we are calling it Opportunity Works, and I think that that sort of calls out what we've been talking about here, which is giving young people opportunity. Works not only for the young people themselves, it works for our economy, it works for our nation. So Opportunity Works. So our communities, does that work? Okay, so I am going to name the communities, and I'm going to name the backbone organizations and their collaborative, because those two things coming together are really what this work is about. And I'll call them out, and then I'd like them to stand up for a round of applause, and I'll do it alphabetically. So I will start with Boston, Massachusetts. You're going to put down your phones with the pictures and stand up. It's the Boston Private Industry Council, the Boston Opportunity Agenda, and the Boston Opportunity Youth Collaboration.
Yay!
Hartford, Connecticut, Capital Workforce Partners, and the Hartford Opportunity Youth Collaborative. Where are you? Yeah. This is going to be a real shocker. New Orleans. The Cowen Institute and the Employee Collaborative.
Stand up.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia Youth Network, and Project U-Turn. This one is exciting. They're new to the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund peer learning community. We really are excited to welcome San Francisco, California, Bay Area Community Resources, and Roadmap to Peace. Where are you? An old friend to the OYIF, Santa Clara, California, Kids in Common, and the Santa Clara County Opportunity Youth Partnership. Where are you? And last but not least, South King County, Washington. It's a co-backbone of United Way of King County, Community Center for Education Results, and the Roadmap Project. Congratulations. I'm going to turn it over to Adria.
Morning, everyone. So along with spurring local innovation to build evidence of what works to improve outcomes for opportunity youth and other vulnerable populations, the Social Innovation Fund, since it was first a gleam in Melody Barnes's eyes when she was in the White House, has also catalyzed innovation in the financing of these efforts. And so it is my great pleasure this morning to recognize and thank both the public and the private funders and partners for this effort. First of all, we are so grateful to the Corporation for National and Community Service for awarding $6 million for the first 3 years of this 5-year initiative. Thank you so much to the corporation. Yeah. I want to say we also want to thank them for making Opportunity Youth and Collective Impact priorities in the competition, which definitely kind of called out to us when we saw it. And we want to take this moment to recognize and thank our inaugural national match funders. First, the Ford Foundation and the James Irvine Foundation, who've long been supporters of the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, were willing to commit, we're willing, I just kept thinking I needed to get taller. We're willing to commit early on while we were in the application process. Yeah. You had to actually come in with a certain amount of match, and they stepped up and did that for us, which was wonderful. And we definitely want to take this morning to recognize and thank the Prudential Foundation, our flagship corporate partner, who have come in to be part of this inaugural group of national match funders. So please, let's thank the Prudential Corporation. Because of these 3 investments, along with a few pending ones that I can't quite name yet, but I'd love to, we are about halfway to raising the match for the first 3 years of this project. And finally, I really want to recognize, I can't do it by name, I'm afraid, and thank the regional and local and community foundations in each of the 7 communities that have already stepped up and pledged most of the match, the local match, the one-to-one match, for the first year. So let's, one more round of applause for all our partners. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Mamadou Njaya, who's going to talk about what this is meaning, we hope, for the field.
So I wanted to take just a few seconds, I guess, to talk about the excitement that this represents for the field. Opportunity Works, I think, is exciting for 2 reasons. One is certainly money, right? It gives us the money to hire the staff who are going to run the programs to change the lives of Opportunity Youth. But second, and I think very important, is this the evidence part of it, right? So under Opportunity Works, we have a unique opportunity to build the evidence for these interventions, to really make the case that these interventions work and that they make a difference in young people's lives, and especially in the lives of boys and men of color. We are going to disaggregate data through the evaluation of Opportunity Works specific to boys and men of color. And just imagine what we can do with that evidence, right? With I think I would assume we can get more money, right? Right, the corporation, right, Prudential, and Keisha, who's here somewhere. So we are really, truly excited about at last having the evidence that these interventions work, and hopefully raise more money, run more programs, re-engage more Opportunity Youth. Thank you, those of you who work on the ground every single day with these students. We appreciate you, and this is for you as well.
All right, crazy for me to stand between this incredible panel and getting it started. So Steve Patrick, again, you guys are tired of me, Executive Director of the Aspen Forum. So my job to close this out is to do 3 quick things. First, recognize and acknowledge the national network at scale of communities that do this reconnecting work. So all 22 sites in the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, stand up so we can acknowledge you. Come on, everybody. All right, second, you can sit down while I say the second thing. We know from Arnold Chandler's data that if you are an African-American male and you do not finish high school, you have a 68% chance of going to prison by age 35, right? 68% chance of going to prison by age 35. These grants are about changing those percentages. That's what this work is about. And the mayor who sits with us today has been a leader on this for years. So we know Cities United and the national network of mayors that Mayor Landrieu and Mayor Nutter lead, Philly's part of this work, know that data has to shift, that we have to make that change. And that's what these grants are about. We're in it for the long haul. Cities United is part of this. My Brother's Keeper United, with the new initiative that the president launched, is a part of this work. There's a long history of the Executive Alliance for Boys and Men of Color and Philanthropy that's a part of this work. And in a lot of ways, this is the place where all those national leaders get to hit the ground. This is where the rubber meets the road, the work you all do. all 22 of you. And I could not be more proud to stand in front of you and say, we're going to change the numbers together. Nothing stops a bullet like a job, and you all are helping young people get on pathways to college and career and to break the intergenerational transmission of poverty. And this is one exciting moment about real, long, hard work, and it is about the work, and we at Aspen stand with you in this. So let's go forward together. Thank you, panelists.
Is this thing on? Before we go into the discussion of our panel, because of those who are on the stage today and their engagement on this issue, those who are native New Orleans, who lead the city, who have been the part of the fabric of the city and the Social Innovation Fund, I don't know if you all have any comments that you want to make with regard to the announcement that you just heard.
Mr. Mayor.
I guess that's why I'm in the middle, huh? Pin the tail on the donkey. How's everybody doing?
Hey.
Nice to see you. Welcome to New Orleans. Hope you like it. You like it? We have to-go cups, you know. Everybody's all excited about our to-go cups. We're transforming the world, but to-go cups are the big deal. It's great to see Melody. Thank you so much. You remember you and I spent some time together on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard a long time ago. Exactly. In Cafe Reconcile's living room, talking about what that portended for the future. Walter, you have been great to pick up that and give us a forum to speak about it. The President's initiative on My Brother's Keeper, and I'm thrilled that you're here, has really kind of tried to frame it nationally for everybody. And of course, great leaders like Scott, who create the ability to take money and get it to the ground, do it in a way that makes sense, and give us space to create, is really important. I'll just say just a couple of general things about this. I'm very interested in what captures us as a nation. Somebody said what you spend your time and attention on is what you care about. So if you watch CNN and Fox and there's a shooting in Columbine, or there's a plane that crashes, or there's a riot in Baltimore, we spend a lot of time about all of that stuff. You will notice, though, that we don't hardly spend any time on TV talking about the plight of young African American men outside of the context of the relationship that they have with the police, which is not an inconsequential discussion that needs to be had. I would only say that I don't see anybody marching in the streets about young kids killing each other or the number of children that don't have jobs. And basically, what I've come to notice is something that we should have all noticed from the beginning, is that human beings, in order to do well in their life, have to be loved, nurtured, and formed, and given an opportunity to do good things, and then the opportunities have to be there. That's about as simply stated that you can state in a way that is clearly something that cannot be contradicted. And I think it's also clear that we as a country have lost our way on this issue, and all of us are trying to find the way back. So in that frame, I would say that as a country, we are particularly bad at finding opportunities, finding the people, and then not only connecting them, but training them for the thing. And so in New Orleans, we recognized how bad everybody was at that, a failure on the federal, state, and local levels, private sector, not-for-profit, faith-based community. And I think all of us are working in the space of trying to find a model for the country that we can then fund, right, scale, and sustain. And I think that's the great work that at least we're trying to do today. I don't know specifically about the programs that have been awarded today. Congratulations to all of you. Those of us in New Orleans, that team over there are really walking through the darkness on this thing. They're working by faith, not by sight. And their mission is either to find a way or to make one, right? And get down to the nitty-gritty of finding the young person, right? Helping find the job or creating the job, and then helping create a specific pathway. We call ours Pathway to Prosperity. And it's almost like when one of my kids was sick, we went to Children's Hospital. When you walked in Children's Hospital, there was a big blue line that said, if you want to go to the emergency room, go that way. There was a yellow line that said, if you want to go somewhere else, go this way. There was a green line. And I said, I wanted it that simple. When you found an individual, I want you to be able to show them the pathway that clearly, and I want to have someone along the pathway taking them there. And then at the end of the day, they have to be responsible, and keep their job. And just trying to find what I call building the mousetrap, the internal mechanisms, and then the funding, and then the sustainability, and then keeping them there, right? Which is another stick-to-itiveness. You know, our mamas and daddies told us this. You got to go through hard stuff, and you got to stay when things get bad. Just teaching us how to do that is important. And I think that, as you said, Stephen, you know, there's nothing stops a bullet like a job. I think that there's a lot of evidence that that is true. And I think that the work that you all are going to do is going to prove that fact. But then the hard work is going to be, once you do all of this and you prove to people what we already know to be true, whether or not the people who need to are actually going to hear it, listen to it, and feel committed as a nation to taking us where we know we need to go. Because, and Walter, you and I have talked about this a lot, as we are now encapsulated by the issues of national security and protecting the homeland, there is a reasonable debate that should come into the fore about whether or not we can be strong abroad if we're not strong at home. Because in order to do the things abroad, whatever it is that you might think we need to do, and that's a big debate for the country to have, but whatever it is, on the isolationist side or on the expansionist side, you can't do it if you don't have the resources and the people, and we're the ones who produce the resources and the people. And if we're not strong at home, we won't have the freedom of having the debate about how we protect our national security, which of course is paramount in everybody's mind. So from where I sit, this is an issue of national concern and of national security, much less moral justice. And I think that the work that you all are going to do should be done in that light, and you should approach it with that kind of intellectual curiosity, vigor, and commitment, because I think the future of the country hangs in the balance.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we want to talk about, as you talked about, the blue line, the green line, the yellow line, we want to talk about those pathways and how we help our young people get there, and the innovation that's necessary to create them. And in fact, the disruption of systems that have done things that have been so harmful to young people at scale. How do we create a positive environment and positive pathways with young people also at scale? And that's why we wanted to talk about innovation, and in the context and in conversation with you all, because back in your communities, you all are the innovators. You are thinking about ways to disrupt things that you've seen year after year, generation after generation, century after century, that have been so detrimental to young people. That's also why we thought it was a smart connection to talk about this along with the Social Innovation Fund. I cannot take credit for the SIF, but I am proud of the fact that we thought about the Social Innovation Fund in the transition in 2008. Michelle Jolin, who many of you know, and others who were part of the transition team that said, this is an idea that we want to advance because some of the things that you were just talking about are so critical. How do we think about scale? How do we think about innovation? And how do we think about what's happening that's so smart in local communities? And the SIF we saw as a tool that was going to help us do that. And in thinking about that, local communities, scale, innovation, we thought we'd pull back a little bit this morning and add to the conversations that you all are having every day about innovation and what it means and how do you change big, complicated, hairy, thorny systems. And I thought I'd start out with you, Walter, because you have been thinking about innovation for a long time in a lot of different ways. In my house, my husband and I joke about the fact that, you know, we're trying to crank out a paragraph, and meanwhile, Walter has turned out a book. And then there's another one. Of course, we know his secret weapon is sitting right there, Kathy Isaacson, who's an amazing editor for him. But you, not only in your most recent book, The Innovators, but your work on Ben Franklin, who we think about as a founding father, but also an inventor and an incredible innovator. You've been thinking about innovation and disruption and people who have been doing this literally for centuries. And I'm wondering how you define innovation, which is often an overused word, and also in the definition, what you've seen as you've studied these people who have been managing these big systems that might be helpful to us as we think about it in this context.
Innovation I define pretty simply as disruptive change, leads to disruption, but leads to something better. In other words, change that's disruptive but leads to progress. And you see that throughout human history. Benjamin Franklin was somebody like you all who led a disruptive change, which is trying to create a new type of nation based on respect for various groups. And he, has building funds for every church in Philadelphia. He builds a library. He builds an academy for education of youth. He builds civic associations in order to make sure every kid has a decent opportunity. And in some ways you can contrast him with Jefferson, who was of an older school and believed in the aristocracy. And his goal was to take some people and make them part of the elite. That was the point of the University of Virginia's charter. But you take University of Pennsylvania, which Franklin called the Academy for the Education of Youth in Philadelphia, and it says every person in Philadelphia, every kid, has to have a path to opportunity, just like the mayor talked about. When you see disruptive change happen, it's often because things come together. The Industrial Revolution is the best example because what you have coming together is the steam engine, mechanical processes, and so you have a whole new ways of doing weaving and communications and transportation, whatever. It really is disruptive, and people think it will cost jobs, but it doesn't. The Industrial Revolution creates an explosion of good middle-class jobs. It also creates, it destroys artisanal industries, meaning the individual weaver, the individual shoemaker, because it becomes mass manufacturing. The interesting thing about the new wave of disruptive innovation that's going on is it in some ways returns us to this ability to empower individuals. In other words, you don't need mass manufacturing now. You don't need mass companies. You can be an Uber. You can be an artisanal beer maker. You can start your own little business because the information technology and the ability to reach customers in a web-like, decentralized world brings us back to where people can be more entrepreneurial. So the wave of this revolution is more individual, more entrepreneurial, more small groups being empowered, as opposed to the Industrial Revolution age. The other thing that's happening to me, I think, in the terms of disruptive revolution, and we're going to be talking about this, Michael and I wear 3 or 4 hats. We're on my Brothers Keeper Alliance with the president, we're with Steve Case, at least you're an alumni, where he's looking at disruptive innovation around this country, and that's going to be coming to New Orleans today. And it was at the first phase of the information technology revolution was engineering driven. It was, driven by people really creating computers and networks, et cetera. Now it's going down to places like New Orleans and Austin, and I just came from Nashville, and Steve just came from Atlanta, where communities that are creative, that have arts, that have music, that have, community entrepreneurship, they're the ones seizing a hold of this revolution now. And so that is sort of a theme that ties together social innovation as well as business innovation.
And Walter, in thinking about lessons as people are going back into their communities, particularly as we're trying to focus on innovation and disruption, where we're pushing back against institutions that have been here for a long, long time, ways, policies, practices that have been in place for a long time, and quite frankly have baked into the DNA of the country things that are negative and harmful. So it's not even that we're trying to move to something new and better, but it's also fighting and flipping what's existed and then what's bad on its head. Are there particular lessons that you see based on your research that might be useful?
Yeah, that's why it's called disruptive, because the internet was built with a weird technology. In other words, it wasn't like the phone system where you had some people in control of central hubs and switching stations or whatever. Each and every node of the internet can, transmit information, store information, create information. And if somebody tries to control it, you can just route around it. So the nature of the network digital age is that when you reach resistance, somebody who's authoritarian and trying to control it in an old way, you just have to find ways to route around it, and you will be able to because the technology allows peer-to-peer collaboration rather than having to go through a hierarchical system.
And Mayor, I want to turn to you, given that, and the routing around and the pushing back, particularly as you walked into your position as mayor, and I know you've been thinking about these issues for quite some time. You talked about and mentioned our trip to Cafe Reconcile, and we talked about it walking down the street that day. I will say that he had me walking all over the streets. I had on high heels, and he was like, come on over here, we gotta go over here. But in doing that, how have you approached disruption of the systems, sitting in a position of power and authority here in New Orleans, but focused on disruption of those systems, and specifically as you were trying to approach the criminal justice issues and the fact that New Orleans has such a significant population of opportunity youth? What was your approach as you came into office?
Well, when we got here, we were, we were not literally underwater anymore, but we were figuratively broken in every way. And so the government here was not functioning well. And there really wasn't much formation to the relationships between the private sector, the not-for-profits, the faith-based organizations. When Katrina hit, everything exploded, and the government wasn't functioning well, so innovation began on the ground, and it bubbled up, and people kind of were left on their own. So Scott started working on education, folks started working on housing. They were all out there. And when I came in, although that was good, it was unformed. In other words, the city was going in like 50 different directions. And so I kind of used the convening power of the mayor's office, which is fairly strong. If people acquiesce and actually come when they're invited, which they have to do because the mayor doesn't control everything, although we like to. All right. But in this city, what had happened was there was a huge impetus for civic reform. And to their credit, when I came here and started to help inform things, everybody came, and we tried to focus the city in a thoughtful way so that we could all get on the same page. Even though we don't all agree on everything, we tried to create a way. That was part A. The second thing that happened is we all realized by necessity, this was not a matter of philosophy. This is not a philosophically driven city. I have my opinions about things. I'm a principled person, but I believe in pragmatism attached to principle. But at the end of the day, as Walter said, disruption is nothing but disruption if you don't create something better. That's just being a pain in the butt. That's what that is. Don't be confused with that. All right? If you want to, you got to have the responsibility of creating something better. And that's really important, and it gets lost on a lot of people, especially advocates who don't really have a view of where they're going. They just like to hear themselves talk. Not a whole lot of time for that, for me. All right, so one of the things we realized, yeah, go ahead. You should applaud yourself. And check yourself, too, when you start doing it. So I tell people, don't bring me a problem if you don't have an answer. I got that from an old Jesuit priest, Father Harry Thompson. If you went and complained, he made you the head of the committee, and he said, you fix it. Yeah. And that works.
Senator Kennedy used to say
exact. Well, maybe that Father Thompson was his priest. I don't know. But that second thing happened. But what we realized is that we were in the soup together, and we couldn't get out if we didn't help each other because we didn't have enough stuff. And the third thing we realized, if we're being honest with each other, and this may be true in your cities, but it's certainly true in New Orleans, because we are an old city and an historic city. We also are set in our ways, and we really like ourselves even in our dysfunction, which equals we don't really like to change. Change does not come easy to us. Our first inclination is to stick and to hold, not to change and to innovate, which is why what Walter and Scott and Tim Williamson are doing at Idea Village is so miraculous because it's so different from how we were. But I think Katrina, which was a near-death experience for us, really jolted us out of our comfortableness, and it gave us an opportunity to see what could be. And this is what's magical about what's happened in New Orleans, and this may be very different from your city, and the answer is you might need a major event to spur you into this. We can talk about that later, but it certainly happened here, where people got clarity of purpose, because we had a death experience or a near-death experience, and it clarified our thinking. And the moment that we're going through now that Walter describes, I think appropriately probably, is New Orleans' third historical renaissance since we came into being in 1718, almost 300 years ago now, which we'll celebrate in 2018. We are going through this really kind of lucid moment where we know if we don't get it right now, we're going to be stuck for a long time, A. And B, because the rest of the world reminded us how special we were, that we had forgotten and taken for granted, we now have found a pathway to being the best that we've ever been, which is really, really good. And that's described as a great education system where kids are learning, a healthcare system where we're getting on the front of healthcare, rather than on the backside of it. An economic development system that is actually producing the best competition that we've had. Exhibit A is the World Trade Center, which is a public building that we just put out to bid in the Four Seasons, which are the best in the world, actually came to our city and actually gave us a great deal. We didn't have to give them anything. In other words, we didn't have to beg them to come. They wanted to come here because they can make money, not because they're being nice to us. Economic development on that kind of scale. Government reorganization. So to answer your question, I have basically stripped down the organization of government and redesigned it, whether it's the board that runs the airport, the board that runs the railroad, whether it's the recreation department, whatever it is. Those things now are public-private partnerships that are open and transparent. And then finally, maybe not the most significant thing that I did, but I changed the procurement policies in the city. And all big cities suffer with this because contracts are awarded, based on who you know, not what you know. We've changed that completely. And so we've opened up the playing field and we've handled it in a way that I think is unassailable. So now anybody can come into this town and do business, and you don't have to just know the mayor. You got to come with a good deal for the citizens. And those structures that we have changed, the structures and the way they work, have yielded more inclusion, more input, and a better product. On the criminal justice side, what challenges us here, and it may challenge you in your cities, is that not all the people that run those things are beholden to the mayor, where the mayor says, I demand that you do, and if you don't, I'll fire you. I kind of like that model. All right? But that's not what we have. Now, the reason I say that to you is because when you get into the issue of criminal justice, police departments, those are command and control structures. And when people want to know, well, how come things don't work fast? One of the reasons is there are other people that may not share your opinion, that do not operate at your will, that could be elected, and they could have a whole bunch of different agendas. So, for example, I'm in a big fight with the sheriff right now about the size of the jail. If he worked for me, I could tell him what to do and he would do it. And there would be a clear directive based on what I think the citizens want. But he's an elected official himself, and we have different opinions. So we fight about that. I think the jail should be smaller. He thinks it should be bigger. I think he's wrong, right? I think I'm right. So what happens is that, no, I'm not trying to be cute, but I'm just objectively telling you, when you say disruptive structures, the things that stop you from being able to go fast are things that are built into the systems the way they're structured and designed. And sometimes if you don't change them, and I will end with this, my analysis of when government doesn't work well, and sometimes I think it works very well, but when it doesn't, or when it's working the least, there is a statutory or a legal construction that separates, for some strange reason, the person who has the responsibility to pay for it over here, and that is disconnected and alienated from the person that has the power to say what does. Those things have got to be lined up. So I would just say, whatever you're creating, whatever it is, make sure that there is integrity in not only what you're going to do, but the ability, the will, and the responsibility to get it done. When you line those two things up, whatever it is that you're trying to create has a much better chance of getting there structurally. This is why Congress is having trouble right now. This is my opinion. I'm not putting this on Walter or anybody else. There are 435 members in Congress. There are 100 senators, right? Congress right now is being run by 25%, which is, according to the Boehner rule, the most conservative side of it. So now you have an organization that's got 535 votes. The whole world thinks that we throw the ball up in the air, and the 435 congressmen have a really nice, lucid discussion, about what's in the best interest of America. That's not, and then that's not why Congress is stuck. Congress is stuck is because under the Boehner rule, they will not bring a measure to the floor of the House that 25% of the 435 think you should bring there. So we can't even have a discussion about stuff. That is by definition a dysfunctional organization. Right. So you don't want to set anything up like, no, I'm not being philosophical at the moment. I'm just being practical about, you said what structures don't work. And we have these weird structural rules that stop us from getting to wherever it is that we decide to go. And a lot of the things we're working on in the city in a minor way, like how's the health department run, how's the recreation department run, how do I interact with the universities, is setting up those kind of structures so that you can have meaningful dialogue, you can get a clear vision, and then you can get to wherever it is that you're going.
Well, and before I turn to Scott, there are a couple of things that you said, and I want to take it back to the conversation we had on Wednesday. Angela Glover Blackwell was here, and she talked about equity, and we talked about race. Arnold Chandler, who's also here, gave us a lot of really interesting data that we're going to also talk about later today. And Ashley from your administration was here, who was fantastic, and she...
Hey, Ashley.
There... well, and I didn't even know she was going to hear it, and when I was going to say this, and she gave you a lot of credit for being willing to come to the table and have a conversation about equity and about race, and put that squarely on the table. And a few minutes ago, you talked about cities and structures being set in their ways, and often the set in their ways includes building into the DNA of that structure inequity, issues around race that are structural, and an unwillingness not only to change it, but even to talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, there's no way we can go about changing it. And I'm wondering how you brought that to the table, and thinking about your peers around the country, when you talk to them, what you hear them saying about ways that you can suggest to people here that they have those conversations in their communities as well, because that goes to the disruption that's so necessary in some of these systems.
I don't want to co-opt the whole panel, but I could talk about this all day. I just think we're afraid to talk about race in the country because it stings us, and we don't know how to do it. And I think that's sad. And I think that we all try to be politically correct, and you can just watch the discussions on TV. Nobody ever gets to anything other than, well, it's personal responsibility, no, whether it's racism, and that's it. That's like the whole discussion. When you boil down all of the talking points, whether it's, folks on the right or folks on the left. Walter knows this better than I do. I mean, when you're from the South, let me put it this way. I'm a white kid from the South. I think I have a special obligation to address this issue because I think that when you look at where slavery started, right, it started here. Slaves were sold 5 blocks from here at Congo Square. The slaves came from Senegal and Gambia. They came as part of a covenant that John Law had, right, because he owned the covenant in Senegal and Gambia and Haiti. And so New Orleans, when you feel this weird thing that you feel that you love that gets all up in you, when you hear the music and all of that stuff, all of the food, all of the music, all of the clothes, all of the architecture came to us from France, from Spain, somewhat from Great Britain, a little bit from the German coast, but mostly from Senegal, Gambia, Haiti, and all of us getting together at night doing things, that people do when they get together, right? That's where jazz came from, and that's why I look like I look.
Right. Yeah,
Did you hear what I just said?
Yeah.
Okay. You understood, you heard me, right?
Right.
Okay, you feel me. All right. And so in New Orleans, right, the slave trade started here, and it is not controvertible that slavery and its consequences continue to play itself out on the streets of America, and the consequences therefrom. I don't think that's refutable. I know we have a hard time saying that because everybody says, well, why do you keep going back to that? Well, the truth is because nobody has ever really said, well, yes, that's true. We recognize it. It's not our fault, but now it's our responsibility to think through that. Some people hang on to that as though by hanging on to it, it's going to make the future better. And we can't ever get past that discussion of reconciliation we have not had that reconciling moment. That is what this is me. I think there's a strain of that you're feeling and are seeing in an inarticulate way by people that are behaving badly in response to negative things that have occurred that shouldn't have happened in Gina, Ferguson, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's taking those, they're imposing their same will on it. People are appropriately acting and some people are acting out. But if you hear the big voice, what I hear, I hear black boys saying, I have been forsaken. Kill or be killed. In my neighborhood, Mayor, if I don't have a gun, I'm going to die. I hear these words directly from my young men. Now, these kids are not educated enough to go back with the history that I just told you. But in the lives that they have led, the young African-American boys in New Orleans are saying to their mothers, they're saying to their fathers, they're saying to their priests, they're saying to everybody, hey man, you left me. All I got is my partners. I'm hanging out here. I'm trying to protect myself. Now, I said something really stupid. I've said a lot of stupid things. But when I started this, because I don't understand kids killing kids because you got disrespected, it's not, I don't get that. I was in the don't hold me back kind of, y'all remember that? Don't hold me back. You better get off me. Don't hold me back. You know what I'm talking about. You look nice. You look in the White House, and you know what I'm talking about. On the street, right? Y'all, you understand? I don't get the, hey man, I don't like your tennis shoes, or you disrespect him. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I think it's irrational. I think it's unnatural. Until I started talking to the young men, and I got in their shoes. I do think that objectively it's unnatural and it's not rational, but to them, in the world that they live in, where they came from, what they have in front of them, what they have behind them, it makes perfect sense to them, which is an absolute definition of craziness. And we have to change that paradigm. But here's the thing. We can't even have a forthright conversation. If the President of the United States speaks to these issues, he immediately gets whacked by the white establishment as being a president that's not speaking for all the people, but just for some of the people. So he's a politician, so the White House and his domestic advisors say, hey man, you know, we're busy dealing with Putin. We got this guy, you know, Netanyahu. We got Cameron. We got all of this stuff. You can't get caught over there, right? You got to, and I understand he's the president of the whole world. That's a big job, right? And so when he doesn't speak about it, African-American community says, brother let us down. He's not even from the street. Dude's from Hawaii. Right? He's not from the 12th Ward. He didn't walk down the street by Wilson Elementary School. He was in Hawaii on the beach doing whatever he did. He ain't white enough. I mean, he's not black enough. Right? Am I telling you the truth or not? Okay. And so, you know, what do you want him to do? There's no space for him to go. And so what I would just say to this, the reason I did it was because, you know what, everybody, we got to talk about this because this is really clear. You got to hear me about this. You cannot go around the issue of race. You cannot go around it. It is not go-aroundable. It's not like this is a theory. You can't, it does not work. We've tried to go around it. We've tried to be politically correct. We've tried to, let's get together. But you got to go through this, and through it is painful. That's the only, look, this is what we learned from South Africa, and the reconciliation is that you got to go through it, which is why we're working with William Winter with the Welcome Table, with the William Winter Institute of Racial Reconciliation from the University of Mississippi. We actually have something in New Orleans called a Welcome Table, and for the last 2 years, Judy Reese-Morse, my deputy mayor, has been convening meetings at people's tables where African Americans and whites sit and talk to each other and get to know each other and grow through this because it takes generations to do. But we can't keep talking past each other. And it's not just a matter of social justice, all right? It is about it could be, if that's what all you want it to be, it could be a matter of being, you know, a really good person. It also could be that when you leave people behind that are superstars, you get left behind too. So let me give you just this example. Everybody says that, you know, to African American kids, basically, you know, Black Lives Matter. If we really thought Black Lives Matter, if we really thought that would be true, all the people that are marching, for whatever reason they're marching for, would also be marching for the 7,000 black boys that were killed last year. So I hear that Black Lives Matter. I completely agree with it. And I think that issue that everybody's talking about how the criminal justice system treats African American men is a big deal that needs to be focused on. But that's not about Black Lives Matter. That's about equal justice. That's what that's about. And that's an important thing. But if it was really just Black Lives Matter and Black Boys Matter, right, we would be talking about the catastrophic number of young African American boys that are dying on the streets of America at 40 a day every day. So Walter's heard me say this, and I hope I don't bore you, but I'm going to give you a number that should shock you about the number of deaths on the streets of America. So I ask all my people that are doing stuff overseas, where's the war? Here's the question, where's the war? Now let me give you the statistic, you know it. From 1988 to 2012, 630,000 American citizens have been killed on the streets of America. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. It's a big number, 630,000. Do you know how big it is? It's more American citizens that were killed in all of the wars of the 20th century. So I ask you, where's the war? And when people start talking about protecting the homeland, and by the way, I'm not an isolationist. I believe in a strong national security. I just think we're a big enough country to do both at the same time if we're willing to pay for it. So I'm going to finish with this because these are the kind of things that are important. If we don't get to this issue, everything that we're trying to do structurally will not be welcome. You see what I'm saying? Because you're going to be beaten up against a thing that doesn't want to change. Now, there is great hope, I see, on criminal justice reform. So you're beginning to see now for the first time, probably in our lifetime, where there's a convergence, right, and some clarity coming on we did this the wrong way for the last 40 years. We've been tough on crime, but we haven't been smart on crime. And we didn't do a good job of really separating bad people, some of whom happen to be black, from every young kid that does something wrong being a criminal, and 3 strikes you're out and all of that stuff, and the exponential amount of money that we spend on criminal justice versus Nord playgrounds, that's our recreation department, and on the front end of this stuff is upside down. And so now you see kind of a bipartisan swing. We'll see if they really mean it. I hope they do, but I think that's evidence that things can change over time, and we're moving in that direction if we're forthright and honest about where we've been and where we want to go.
Right, and I think, well, first of all, thank you for that and painting
I shouldn't be so
that
blunt.
picture
Y'all are in my
and your
city. I'm
approach
supposed to be a better host.
to that. And I want to use that also as a backdrop as all of that is happening and talking about the work that Scott has been doing. And he talked to us a little bit the other day about how he came to this work, and specifically thinking about opportunity youth, of whom boys of color are a significant number, and now working with an employer, Tulane, and which is also an educational institution, but also working with other employers to try and build pathways and to serve as a bridge for so many of these young people. And the way, Scott, if you could talk to us about the way that you've been trying to build that bridge, and given everything that the mayor has just talked about and the perception and the systems, how you've tried to approach disruption in the system and bring innovation to it, and build that pathway and get other employers to understand the importance of that as well.
You know, in the last 10 years, I've had 2 epiphanies. And as it turned out, those 2 epiphanies are connected to one another. The first one was after Katrina and the near-death experience the mayor cited for not only our city, but for my university. I began to reimagine the role of a university. We are a major research university, Tulane University, which means research and teaching is paramount in what we do. And even though our mission statement has in it civic engagement, I came to realize after Katrina that that was on a lower pedestal than research and teaching. And that in fact, what we should do is to elevate community engagement and involvement to the same level, if not a higher level, and reimagine us as a university in service, using the intellectual talent and the human talent we have to help build healthy and sustainable communities, starting right in our own city. In many ways, it took me back to what happened in the 1860s with the Morrill Act and the creation of land-grant colleges. And we have lost sight, I think, in many ways in our colleges and universities to why we originally invested so heavily in higher education in America. That was epiphany number 1. Epiphany number 2 was this very, very determined view I have that the future of our city, based on my experience here in New Orleans and many years in Cleveland, all deals with youth success. And that every single young person, regardless of their circumstances or their zip code, should have a clear pathway to education and a career. And we should not in any way dilute that particular vision. Every single child And if we can accomplish that, if we could truly move the needle on the educational pathway and on the career pathway, we will build a great city for the 21st century. With that in mind, we focused early on at Tulane University on public education, K through 12, because that was where the immediate need was. And Tulane, with many other partners, many of them in this room, are quite proud of where we are with public education. And we can't declare victory yet. It's still a work in progress, but the achievements to date are quite stunning. But the byproduct of a very poor public school system for decades, and exacerbated by what happened during Katrina, has exploded our number of opportunity youth or disconnected youth in our community. I told you that yesterday. The third highest in the country of the 100 metropolitan areas is in New Orleans. And we have now at Tulane University with our partners, and there are many partners, all of them sitting at the tables over there, too many to mention today, are really now focused individually and collectively on how to elevate these young people. At Tulane University, we're piloting a program, many of you know about it now, called the Earn and Learn Career Pathways Program. It's unique in my view in several ways. First of all, it's actually it's actually hosted in an anchor institution, because we are the largest private employer in Orleans Parish and one of the largest economic engines. So the fact that we're housing us is important. Secondly, that it's being done by a major research university. I can't think probably of another major research university in the country that's made the commitment to this area that we have. I hope there are others that I don't know about. Third is we're doing it in partnership with Delgado Community College. And that in itself, you may say, is strange, a major research university with a community college. But that partnership is the right partnership. The program is 1 year long. It's both a youth development program and a workforce development program, so it's both, to ensure that the young people get on a pathway to an education and a career. We use Tulane University as the largest employer as the place where they would be employed this year. So we have 16 of Opportunity Youth at Tulane University for 1 year, and they're focused on two different areas, the skilled crafts area and information technology, digital media. Why those two areas? That's where some of the workforce needs are in New Orleans. So we're matching it up with what are the needs of businesses here in New Orleans. They're being paid for their work at Tulane University, and they're being evaluated just like any other employee. And at the same time, in parallel, they're going to Delgado Community College and getting a career certificate in their particular area that they're interested in. We are also at Tulane University offering them soft skills, how to dress, how to do a resume, how to report to work on time, all the other things that they don't learn in colleges and universities. And then, of course, now we're at this stage where we'll be graduating the first class, and we will help them get onto either another pathway for more education or for a job. Next year, we will double that program. So next year, it will be 35 at Tulane University, paid for by Tulane University. But I think the true vision of that program is to scale it across New Orleans, where Tulane and Delgado can do the learn part of it, and the earn part can be done by employers. So we can go to all the large employers and say, we've piloted a model at Tulane University and Delgado that works, and by the way, these young people have a credential from Delgado and from Tulane, so that should have some credibility to it. Now what we would like them to do is apprenticeships in your company. Now imagine if we could get 20 companies to do 10 a year. That's 200. And then we could go from there. So the key is to scale it and then to sustain it, because this is the other thing we believe is philanthropic dollars are absolutely essential in the early stages of these initiatives. But you can never scale and sustain strictly on philanthropic dollars. You have to figure out a way to monetize it so people really see the value in Opportunity Youth. And we're also going to test that out. Our program, when we originally conceived it, we had done a very exhaustive study of every major program in the United States, believe it or not, every major program, of which there are some excellent ones nationally and even locally, and just said ours is going to be Demand-driven, it's going to be in an anchor institution. We're a major employer. We're going to lead the way, and we hope others will follow us. But in the end, there's only one measure of success, and that is they get on a pathway to education and a career. If we don't achieve that, we are not successful, and we're going to be unbelievably rigorous in our measurement about outcomes.
Walter, did you?
Yeah, bravo. But, Melody asked me a question a moment ago about how you overcome entrenched resistance by an establishment in order to force change. And when I was answering her question, I was about to talk about what we did with the New Orleans school system, which really had a lot of entrenched resistance to change. And then I realized you were the one who was more responsible for doing it, so I was going to throw that question to you. How did we do it with the school system?
Well, first of all, there were a lot of players in the school system. I was just one big player. I just happened to head up the community committee to sort of re-envision the school system. And we took about 6 months with the help of the Gates Foundation and others to really come up with a new plan. And it was a pretty simple plan, actually, when you think about it. It was to decentralize decision-making down to the school level, invest heavily in human talent, and hold people accountable. And we actually had the notion of doing that through autonomous schools. Interestingly, people forget this. We never once mentioned the word charter schools. It turned out later on that the charter vehicle was a good way to implement the autonomous schools. And now what you see in New Orleans, Walter, which is astonishing. First of all, 92% of the kids in public education in New Orleans are now in charter schools, the highest in America. Second highest is Detroit. They're a little over 50%. Washington, D.C. is number 3. But what is also amazing is that prior to the storm, 67% of the kids in the public school system were in a failed school. Most recent data says that's 7%. 7%. And the other thing is, and I can't remember the exact number, the mayor can correct me, of the 65 or 66 school districts in Louisiana, we were always near the bottom. We're now just about at the median. So I think by any metric you would use, we are making great strides there. And it's going to take, as I said yesterday, another 20 years to get the full potential of it. But I think we're on to something. And I know there are a lot of people, it's controversial about charter schools, and I always feel people miss the point about they're just simply a means to an end. The end is getting every kid an education. Mm-hmm. But what was important to me is, once that was mounted, and there's others doing a brilliant job on this, is who's also working on Opportunity Youth? We're fortunate in New Orleans, we have probably 30, 40 organizations that have devoted their life to this topic for years and years and years. So we're just a new person to it, and if there's anything that distinguishes us, it's just that we happen to be the largest private employer. And that helps as you try to scale and sustain and work with your partners throughout the community.
So he talked about, let me just put a little bit of dressing on top of this salad.
And then I'm going to bring Michael into the conversation too.
You talked about, Scott talked about, he described the what, but you want to know a little bit about the how too. So in every place where all of you live, you have a big shiny thing. It's a hospital, it's a university, it's a whatever. And if you're like every other major American city, you got a neighborhood around it that's not so good. And young men are unemployed, and they live 2 blocks away from an opportunity that other people have. That creates a whole bunch of stuff like, what, mama, what is that thing? And an alienation of why are these people coming from outside of the city into my city, taking our stuff, and I don't even have a chance. Disassociation, alienation, lack of opportunity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So on the how-to in New Orleans, our pathway to progress is something that's surrounded, what Scott talked about, something called anchor institutions. I don't want to assume that you know what that is, but what that is here is hospitals, universities, city government, et cetera, et cetera. So again, with the convening power of the mayor, I asked all of the heads of these anchor institutions to come, and they came. Now, Scott was an aggressive, willing participant and was the impetus, for example, like Ochsner Foundation Hospital, which is about 3 miles away from Tulane, saying, well, gee, if you're going to do it, I'm going to do it too. And so those anchor institutions now are doing what Scott's doing, and in finding folks that are immediately adjacent to the physical structures, but are alienated, and these are the kids that you're bringing in. That's first. Secondly, In order to do this, you have to use data to specifically identify who they are. 52% of African American men in the city are not working. That's a huge number. Well, I said, well, like how many people is that? And folks said, well, we don't know. I said, well, we can know. I'm a politician. When I ran for office for the state legislature, I knew there were 23,602 people in my legislative district. I knew there were 10,000 households. And guess what? I knew every one of you when you voted last and what you did. And I knew what you were interested in, because when I went to your house, I knew what your voting history was. I had a card. I said, well, this is not hard to figure out, but let's really figure out who these people are. Where do they live? What do they do? What box do they fit in? So, for example, Scott's, the opportunity youth, you may be looking for folks that are in this range, from a certain age range that may or may not have graduated from school. Maybe some of us are looking for returning citizens, right, that are a little bit older. Maybe some of us are looking for kids that dropped out of school. And so the specificity that we're approaching it with, which I think is a little bit different. On the issue of schools as we go forward, please don't get caught in a fight in your town about public schools versus private schools. That's not what Scott just said. What happened here was we figured out what worked. And what worked is not a bureaucratic centralized school system, but a system that allowed autonomous schools to exist, that gave principals room to run, gave teachers the ability to teach, held students accountable, held high standards, and what Scott was, and gave parents the right to choose within the public school system. So we didn't get in the voucher fight because we didn't want to spend all of our time talking about 5%. We wanted to go where the real problem was. And what Scott was mentioning to you is now in New Orleans, with 92% of the kids in charter schools, what's amazing is the graduation rate is way up. The dropout rate is way down. And what he was alluding to is that even though before the storm we were like way down here and now we're at 50%, the achievement gap, which talks about the kids' aptitude of the kids in the city, has completely closed as it relates to kids outside of the city, which is our kids are no different from you. If given the same opportunity and the same tools, we can perform at that level or a higher level. And that is not something that's controvertible and something that we think can be hopefully transmitted to the rest of the folks in the country.
And we are talking, and these are great examples and ways to talk about lots of different kinds of innovation and lots of different kinds of levers that have been flipped and pushed against the backdrop we've been talking about. And Michael, I want to bring you in because you have been thinking about and looking at innovation from a lot of different perches. You were at the Case Foundation, which takes on big bets, big issues, big challenges, and with the idea of pushing bold ideas. You also were running the Social Innovation Fund, using a collective impact lens, and brought that to the table at the SIF, and now with My Brother's Keeper. And I'm wondering, given your range of experiences, the tools that you have seen as being most useful and productive in trying to encourage innovation, whether it's private sector, philanthropy, in government.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. That makes it sound like I can't keep a job. I was at the Case Foundation for 8 years.
Yeah, we're going to build you a pathway.
And I'll be with them this afternoon. They welcome me back. It's interesting from experiences in local communities and national organizations. I think what I've come to find, it's really that transformation happens at the intersection between innovation, evidence, and collaboration. Mm-hmm. And when you see all of these things working together, that's where you see some significant results. And that's what's happening here with the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund. And so on the innovation side, it's this idea, Walter put out the definition in the Social Innovation Office and the White House. We talk about social innovation as being new solutions to old problems that lead to better results for the public good. So same thing, and it's really about disrupting the status quo, about saying, good is not good enough. And the interesting thing that happens in the social sector is we allow the same stale, stagnant thing to happen over and over again, year in and year out. And those of us that are in philanthropy, whether that's private philanthropy or government philanthropy, we artificially invest in these, what I would say are, oftentimes initiatives that are not having real significant results. So you need someone who's willing to break it up, who's willing to say, this isn't working, we need to try something new. Someone who's willing to go out on a limb. I think in the private sector, the number is about 20 to 30% is spent on research and development. And the work that we do in the social sector, we're trying so hard just to fund that last staff position. But how are you making room for innovation? It's funny, we'll be with Steve Case this afternoon, and he always told the story about the ATM and how any study that you saw would have never told you that people would walk to the corner of a street and get their money from a bank outside of a wall. But someone thought that it would happen, and someone was willing to disrupt and try something new, and then obviously we saw what happened there. On the evidence part, this is, it's called the Social Innovation Fund, but in many ways it's probably the Social Evidence Fund. And I see my colleagues Keisha and Kirsten from the Social Innovation Fund here. 1 in 8 nonprofits spend $0 on research and evaluation. 52% don't have a theory of change or logic model. And somehow we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We do not have enough money to continue to fund the 1.5 million nonprofits that are out there, many of whom have no idea what direction they're going in, and are counting how many kids they served or how many people walked through the doors, and not what real authentic impact that happened. And so someone has to be willing to have metrics, to have goals, to be willing to go back and make course corrections. And that is something that often we don't want to have that discussion in the social sector and be serious about what that means for our communities. And then lastly, on collaboration, it's this idea of collective impact. I heard someone say that you can't confuse collaboration with collaboration. And so the idea of just getting around a table and talking is not what it's about, but this authentic engagement with shared goals, willingness to look at data together. We've created a situation in communities where we've created this Hunger Games, where nonprofit organizations are competing for these scarce resources, instead of what we're doing here is putting a call to action and saying, you get rewarded for working together. We're connected when we're working together. We can have better results when we're working together. And so when you look at initiatives that have been successful, when you look at positive social change, it's when you have this intersection of all three of these things that are working together. The last thing I'll say, I know in my home community, I won't say it, in Western Massachusetts, I'll just say that, where I grew up, I was born to a single mom in a poor black neighborhood, which is why these issues are so important to me. And I was given all sorts of opportunities. But my saving grace for my life was Boys and Girls Club. I was a Boys and Girls Club kid. My mom dropped me off there every day. It was a safe place, caring adults, all that. And in that same neighborhood, within less than 5 miles away, there are another 5 to 10 organizations with different boards, different budgets, different galas that were all being allowed to work separately and not work collectively for our kids. And that's a disruption that I think I'm seeing here and in this space, that we're seeing positive results when that's all put together.
Great. Fantastic answer. What I'd like to do now is give you all a chance to jump in. So if you've got a question, raise your hand, name, organization, where you're from, and please engage the members of the panel. If you don't, I've been scribbling questions down, because I do. Anyone have any questions? Got one over here to the left. Here comes a mic to you.
Good morning. My name is Jody Christopher Mays Jr. I'm from Baltimore, and I'm here with the Ngoma Foundation underneath the Youth Unlock program. My question is for the mayor. I know you was talking about like the race issue and to try to get people to talk on it. But as far as young African-American male, how could we get those people to talk about the race issues when they really don't care about, some of the things that happened before they came? So how could we address those people and to get them to talk about the issues that affect us as far as race?
Thank you for that question. First of all, you have to have a comfortable space for them to be where they can speak. So Glenn, where's Glenn? He's here. Glenn runs Cafe Reconcile. Melanie, you've been there, which is on Oretha Castle Haley Boulevard, which many, many, many years ago was a prominent small business corridor for African-American businesses before bad things happened. Then it got burnt out. Now it's getting rebuilt. And Cafe Reconcile is, an organization that helped lead the creation of social innovation and social entrepreneurship, where young men and women from the community come to work and learn how to be waiters, waitresses, cooks, run a restaurant, and then actually create businesses. And one of the things that they do is they make sure that the young men and women, now these are folks, these are not folks that are doing well, that dropped out of high school, and these are kids that got shot, like with 3 bullets in them, and they, by the grace of God, managed to pull themselves up. And I mean, the toughest of the tough situation, mothers, little bitty mothers who had their baby shot while baby was in their arms. You know, these are the kids that are working at Cafe Reconcile, just so we're clear about what cohort we're talking about. And one of the things that I find very, very helpful is to make sure that they have a space to talk through these issues so that we can actually understand. So it was really been a blessing for me to sit there and listen, because as a mayor, murder happens, a 2-year-old gets shot in the courtyard of one of our housing developments. We have an immediate reaction. We go out there with everybody. We have Operation Ceasefire. We have a cathartic moment where we reclaim the neighborhood, but people are really, really upset. And you got to sit. And then, of course, I go have a press conference, and this is irrational. This doesn't make any sense. And I say things that a person in my position would feel immediately. But then when I go sit with them and they start explaining things to me, it puts a certain view on the words that I use and my understanding of them, and vice versa. And it really helps recalibrate the major decisions that I make about their lives, part A. Part B, what happens in that situation, so I'm guessing sitting around and talking a lot about this and working through it, is they begin to hear from us what it is they need to hear. I have something that's called the Group Violence Reduction Strategy. Now, this is for kids that are actually in jail, who are in jail for serious things. We're going to do one of these in a week where we bring them into the courtroom. And I stand at the podium, and behind me, you know, the courtroom's got stuff on the left and stuff on the right behind where people sit. On this side are all the social service folks, mental health, substance abuse, nuns, priests, rabbis, everybody that wants to love you and help you and hug you. Back here, law enforcement, ATF, DEA, guns and butter. And I say to them, listen, I love you. I know that you feel forsaken. I know that you feel left behind. You're in the worst situation that you can be in, but you're important to us. And you have to make better choices in your life. If you choose poorly, these guys over here are going to have to come get you, because we have to stop you from shooting each other, and we have to stop you from being killed. But we're going to put you in the front of the line if you want to go. And you can choose today. And I'm telling you, as the mayor of the city, right, that I will put you first, and I will introduce you to somebody that will help you. Those kinds of, let me say this to you. As a member, I said you got to go through it. Go through it is person to person. So we're talking about, so let's not get confused about this. When y'all go back to your nice offices, and you got to have your systems, and you got to do your data, and you got to do everything that he said. That's all true. But Scott reminded you that the only thing that matters is the number that answers the question, did that child, a specific person named Jamie, Jimmy, Susie, or Bob, right? Did they get a job, and were they able to sustain it and build it's one person at a time. The hard work of governing, what my grandma used to call elbow grease, right? You actually got to get into the humanity of me and you knowing each other, talking to each other, understanding each other, and finding the fact that you might be from Baltimore, but you know what? I grew up on Prius Street. And I bet you our neighborhoods were not that different from each other. And you may be so far away, but once you talk to me, there's an understanding and a communion that we have that gives us a better understanding of it. That's the discussion that's not taking place on any level in America. And we've got to find a way to have that. And then when you get that mutual understanding, every human being that I know that has had somebody be kind to them has been kind back.
It's about shared humanity.
I just think that I don't want to be simple about this, but we're talking about these structures that actually produce a sense of shared humanity now, and the fact that you are important to me. And so I told a group of board of directors of a bank, so it was, if it wasn't 100% white room, it was close, and it was a lot of money, and if I did a poll, it would mostly be like very Republican and very conservative. That would have been the group that I talked to. And I tried to explain to them why a young African-American man that lived in the 9th Ward was important to them and relevant to them. And they have a hard time understanding the connexity between those things, because in America, we're in this place where division actually is something that we seem to like because we seem to get stuck in it so much. And I think what's beginning to happen in the second decade of the 21st century is we're spatially moving into a space where we're beginning to understand that we need each other again, and that things are connected and things do matter. And the poem that Don wrote, many, many, many hundreds of years ago, "Do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee," was true then. It's true now, and I'm hopeful. I'm up because I'm generally an optimistic person, that you're beginning to see through the demonstrations, projects that Scott has woven in, that we can prove positive that those connections matter, and they can actually make life better for all of us. And you got to have that discussion on all levels, and you can only do that by getting in a room, knowing people, being with people, understanding them, living with them, and going through the agony of just the general day-to-day living.
Melody, can I just quickly, two quick things. On Monday, we were in the Bronx with the president launching an organization called the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which Walter sits on the board of. And the job of the My Brother's Keeper Alliance will be to really help to expand and sustain the goals of the My Brother's Keeper initiative and move real resources and expertise into communities. But we had a roundtable with the president and a group of young men from across the country, really talking about a lot of these issues of workforce and pathways to opportunity. And the young men were going around sharing with the president various ideas. And we got to a young man from Boston, after we had been talking about job programs and employment, and the young man from Boston pretty much said, "Mr. President, what about love?" And that's my idea, Mr. President. And he shared how his dad wasn't active in his life and how that made him feel, and how, despite the tensions, he still wanted that love. And so it struck the president so much so that if you got to go back and watch the speech that the president gave from Monday because it's powerful. But the last quarter of the speech was the president talking off the cuff about that point, and that while we work on all of these initiatives and thinking about pathways to opportunity, you have to remember there are still so many young men and women in this country who don't have that love. And we know that there are thousands of boys and young men of color, particularly, that are on waiting lists for mentors, for big brothers and sisters alone. And so as we think about this work, who is that constant caring adult and that presence in young people's lives across the country? That's a challenge that we really have to stand up to, because if a kid doesn't feel that, then what's our hope for the next step? And the other thing I just want to add is My Brother's Keeper across the country. There are now more than 220 My Brother's Keeper communities, which New Orleans is one, and the mayor has accepted the president's My Brother's Keeper Community Challenge. And they're creating these safe places to have these conversations. I've been to many forums across the country where law enforcement and young people are coming together, and they're not waiting for a powder keg. They're not waiting for a crisis. They're doing the hard work of planning for the future. And how is the community going to work together, and what does our community want to be, and what are our values of the future? And that just has to be such an important part of this work, making sure that we're doing that hard work so we're not waiting for a crisis to happen to try to address it.
Great. And Scott, please respond. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take in succession maybe 2 or 3 questions in a row and have the panel respond, and then we'll have to wrap up. Please.
There's something Michael said at the end that has haunted me for years, and that is that can true innovation occur absent a bona fide crisis? Or until that point where you're at a crisis situation that everybody acts. And Michael just said something at the very end, which I always is the mark of true leadership is the ability to think forward about what are the issues and try to find solutions or pathways that mitigate the problem will ever occur. The fact that we come in once it's already of crisis proportions is laudable and it is needed, but to question true leadership doesn't ever allow it to get to that particular point, whether it's community leadership or not. And as in the fall, when I was touring the country on book tour, that's the question. Absent Hurricane Katrina, would we be sitting up here today talking about all the innovations in New Orleans? And Mitch may disagree. I think the answer is probably not.
No, I completely agree with you.
And that's a very sad.
I don't like that answer, because people ask me that all the time. Would you guys have done this but for?
Right.
I think clearly the answer is no.
Well, I think
what
that's-
what Scott's posing to us is how we organize ourselves so that the answer can be yes.
Right,
That's
and I
the
think
more
it's
important
also
thing.
understanding that the crisis already exists.
Yeah.
What Katrina did was it pulled back a curtain for the rest of the world to see the situation that so many people were living
Absolutely.
in. So we have to speak to the crisis that sits on the ground.
And you don't want to waste a crisis. You don't want Baltimore to be wasting it or Ferguson to be wasting it, because those were crises that should catalyze action as much as a
Right.
hurricane does.
Right, generations old. So do we have a couple more questions? Really
people
here?
waving over
Great,
there.
please. Mr. Park?
All right, good morning. Yeah, my name is Park Smith. I'm from Austin, Texas. Run a community-based organization there doing work with youth, jobs training, and bringing people back into the fold. But we have a great collaborative going in Austin. And what I've noticed is this conference has been incredible because we've had such intelligent speakers, a room full of people who are already here, ready to move the needle forward. And I'm thinking about those rooms when I go back to Austin that are full of the bankers and the others, and how we sort of force this conversation without the crisis. What you're finding effective at opening this conversation up, just like the young man said, he's interested in how we're doing that at the community level with our young boys of color. How are we going to get the leaders to open their minds to really be thinking about this issue, other than the people in this room who already care about it so deeply?
Okay, so we have a question about getting leadership to think about this. And there was a question over here, I believe. Yes, white t-shirt, yes.
I am from Baltimore, so
We've got a mic for you.
there we go. I am from Baltimore, so I thank you for lifting that call up. And the crisis has been going on. But, as I came down to New Orleans this week, we have been doing that sort of long game planning for, future development and creating incubators and getting the cops and the kids to talk together, et cetera. We've been doing that work. That work is unfunded. It's the work that we do that does not get any money, but we do it anyway. And so I think first is a call for the foundations to stop being so afraid of funding innovation and to really be able to step up and say, and take that risk that you all were talking about. And the second thing is that yesterday I was sitting next to coincidentally sitting next to folks from St. Louis that have been working in Ferguson. And we started talking about this thinking forward thing. And Baltimore has had a really amazing response this week. I've never seen anything like, I've been in Baltimore since 1979. And in the last week, the transformation of the conversation is unbelievable.
Right.
And people are talking, they're talking across lines. White folks are asking what books they should read so they aren't so stupid when they're having a conversation with black folks. I'm seeing young people really step up and just start doing the work. I see the clergy stop showboating and really call to each other and say, we need to do this. And it is, and one of our kids, we had that metaphor about breaking open the hole so that things can run through. One of our kids, I was driving home from a community meeting Sunday night, and this kid's he's all geeked up. He's a football savant, and he said Baltimore got a turnover. Just this week, Baltimore got a turnover, and you don't waste a turnover. And so what I'm asking is, and here in New Orleans, I saw on the ground the stuff that we've been working on for years that has not yet hit the ground because it's not yet funded. So thanks for the proof that the stuff can work. So I really want to thank you all for that. And the second thing is really a question for this community. When I was sitting with the Ferguson folks, we said, what if this community that's sitting here wrapped its arms around Ferguson and Baltimore and just sent a little bit of their contacts. We don't need your money, we need your contacts that will then forward the money to ensure that we make this turnover a game-winning goal. So I just want to pose that question to this group.
Great question. So a question about funding and in some ways knowledge-based transfer to help communities, and also about leadership, and particularly in this moment. And if we could get quick responses, we're getting the hook from lots of different directions. I think your staff has got to get you somewhere next as well. But any responses to those two questions?
Yeah, the first question is I think data speaks. I mean, if you can quantify, if you can measure what the magnitude of the issue is, and then the implications to the community, that will usually get people's attention. Absent data or bona fide crisis, all the words in the world and emotion won't turn the tide. But data has, and even with data, it still takes courageous politicians and people in the private sector to say, we'll do the right thing regardless of the consequences to their own particular lives. If they're not prepared to do that, then I don't think change will occur, regardless of the data.
I would just say quickly, and Walter, you can speak to this, the private sector has stepped up in an amazing way around My Brother's Keeper. And not just foundations, not just the corporate foundation leaders, but the folks that handle business lines. And if you talk to the leaders of these foundations, there was the head of UBS the other day, I mean, your fellow board members on the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, the room yesterday for the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, they get that this is an economic imperative. They understand that we cannot afford to keep this many young people sitting on the sidelines if we're going to remain a globally competitive New Orleans or a globally competitive United States. And so I think we're finally in an era where it will be easier to bring corporate America and not thinking about charity, but thinking about a sustainable workforce for America.
You want me to say something? First of all, I love the fact that corporate America is all in on this. It's important. It can't happen because that's where the jobs are created, and you have to have somewhere, once you find the individual and you train them, they have to have somewhere to go work. That's really, really important, and I'm thrilled and think that's important. I also think that philanthropy is critically important as well. However, when the Speaker of the House says something like, Baltimore ought to be ashamed of itself, we sent $130 million over 10 years in that community, and that's a lot of money. Like, that should have been enough. I want you to think about that, $130 million over 10 years, or whatever. So we sent $3 billion just to Medellin, Colombia. That's a city, all right? And we sent it there to help them with their police force, which is supposed to be a local problem. Because when I go up to Congress, they say, no, all of this stuff is local. In the world of nation building, in the defense budget, Colin Powell says when you break it, you got to fix it. And we as a nation, like the Marshall Plan and all kinds of other stuff, send tons of money over to other places. And again, I'm not an isolationist. I think we can do both. But we know as a nation that if you want to fix places, you need money to fix places, roads, bridges, sewer systems, schools, et cetera, et cetera. Only in the United States of America do we hold the position on domestic side that all of this is local, and what governs locally governs best, so don't ask me for any money. We need, to Scott's issue, what philanthropy does great is give guys like me and other folks like us seed money to figure out what works. What helps is when Bill Gates and all these guys come in, and the Koch brothers, if that's what your politics is, come in with their money and lay it on top of it. But I could take all of Bill Gates's money, every dollar that the guy has, and I can spend it in 5 years just on regular stuff, and then it would be gone. So the wealthiest people in the world do not have the same accumulated wealth of individual taxpayers pooling their money together and directing it to do big things. And America has gotten away from major and massive investments in the cities where people live. I believe it's a federal responsibility. And so what I'm saying is, and look, I want to encourage you, not discourage you. You've got to go do the work. You've got to get the data. And nothing I said should be construed to me that I don't believe in strong families and personal responsibilities in churches. We need all of that stuff because it's not going to be done. But in order for this to happen, in order for rebuild the infrastructure in this country, physical, spiritual, human, we're going to need a massive investment that is going to take dollars rightly targeted based on evidence-based practices that are going to help, because as Scott said, we're talking about 15, 20 years, 30 years of this, and it's not going to happen for free. It's going to cost everybody something, and if it is a national imperative, then the money and the resources should follow. It should be a federal, state, and local responsibility, collaboration, and partnership, but it's certainly not just. I don't think there's anybody in this room that would raise their hand and say Baltimore is just a local issue. That is clearly a national issue. Ferguson indicates that it is. New York indicates that it is. The big fight you're going to have next is it a federal question? I happen to believe that it is. Some people don't believe that it is, but I don't think we're going to get there without us redirecting our resources in a smart way that helps sustain these particular new ideas that we're trying to scale.
Absolutely. Walter,
And I'll
wanna
try
bring
to
us
wrap
home?
it up quickly by taking your point about what happens when you speak not in rooms like this, but the boardroom in Austin, with the Republicans and others there. Your point about not wasting the Baltimore crisis and watching people work across lines and even ask you what books to read. And in some ways, your comment about Speaker Boehner, which is, it's easy, and this is going to be a slightly uncomfortable thing to say, but it's easy in this room to say all the things we've been saying. But what we have a problem in this country is that it used to be a national imperative that every kid had a decent shot. And now we've become a polarized country where that's not acted upon. When you get a Katrina and you watch you as lieutenant governor in a boat picking up people, you think, I get it, we're all in the same boat. And then the people who are in that bank board and the people who are in the 12th ward where you and I grew up say, oh, I get it, we're all together. And so you start doing that. That's what a crisis can do. We are now at that crisis point in various places, but we haven't been able to do more than preach to the choir. This is the choir in this room. We haven't been able to bring people together and say, even though we do have corporations helping us, they're doing it for economic interest. This is actually not just an economic issue, it's a political issue, and it's a moral issue. For what does America stand for? It stands for the fact that every kid gets a decent opportunity. Now, you talk about Speaker Boehner. He said what he said. We sent $130 million to Baltimore if it's not about money. He also then went on to say it's about creating jobs and it's about creating opportunities. And at some point, somebody's got to go to Speaker Boehner and to Paul Ryan and the people of good faith in the other parties and other things and say, you know what, you're right. It's about creating jobs and creating opportunities. So let's start. Every kid should have a summer job this summer. Every kid in America should have a summer job this summer. It's not that hard. Let's get it done. Every kid should have a good after-school program. Let's get these things funded. And let's quit making this a partisan debate and say, all right, we're going to say it's about jobs and opportunity. All sides can agree on that. Now let's just do it.
I accept your invitation to the meeting.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think the president should call him up and say, let's do it.
Well, on that note, though, Paul Ryan, so Jack Kemp, kind of led the way for these guys, and Paul Ryan did a tour. And I'm really engaged. Steve Scalise, who's the third, is from here. It would be great to get Paul Ryan and some of the folks that are well-meaning and well-intended.
Including Steve Scalise.
And Steve Scalise and say, okay, look, how are we going to do that? And if we can stay focused in that area, I think you can actually move the needle.
That will be our next plenary.
We always set up your next plenary. We know how to do that in Aspen.
Please help me thank our wonderful panel. Thank you.
That's a really good. Ask Paul Ryan to come.
Everybody was doing that shit. Thank you.
He's going to come up and transition us.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll do it really quickly because I'm mindful of the time. Our breakout sessions will begin right at 10:15 in about 5 minutes, and then we will, after that, go right into team planning time at 11:45. We'll come back here to close out the convening at 1:15. So we'll see you all back here for the closing plenary then. Thank you, everyone.